Begin without them and call a meeting to order. I'm going to lead the pledge. If you would join with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. No. The first item on the agenda, I just want to make an announcement. We are moving item 5 to 4 and 4 to 5. So the presentation will be item number 4. Okay. Public comments. This is a time reserved for the public to address the board on items not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Please begin. Please identify yourself, too.
Hello.
Thank you.
My name is Penelope Lapome. I live in Ridgecrest. I've been following the SGA Sigma activities, and from what I've heard and listened to, I think you need to have a financial committee to figure out what legitimate expenses are and which ones are maybe extraneous or would be nice to have kind of expenses, and figure out the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Derek Hoffman, legal counsel from Meadowbrook Dairy. I just have 2 very brief comments. One is, as you all know, we had a workshop earlier this month on the fee proposal, and I don't see an item for that on the agenda today, but I just ask if the board would be willing, or staff, just to provide an update on where we stand with that and maybe what's coming next. And then the second brief request is just a request that you pull item 3A from the consent calendar to take a brief public comment on that item. That's regarding the minutes for the March 15 meeting. Thank you.
3A, you mean the minutes?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Stan Rotora. I'm here speaking for myself. About 3, maybe 4 months ago, I started asking about when the second DRI report would be released to the public. The first comment that I got was it needed to be vetted through Stetson before it could be released to the public, and so that happened. Then I was told that the report needed to be vetted through the TAC before it could be released to the public. And that happened. At the last TAC meeting, I was told that the second DRI report would not be released to the public. They were going to wait until the next report was released and put all of it together. My feeling is if the DRI report can be released to Stetson, if it can be released to the TAC, it can be released to the public. I understand that it's a Navy decision, but the Navy is part of this organization, and I think giving the public information can't hurt, it can only help. So I would like to suggest that you all remind our Navy friends that they're part of this. We're working together. We need to do this as a team, and the I got a secret thing, I'm sorry, that just is not acceptable. Thank you.
May I comment to that? I have no idea what you're talking about. The Navy has released that report. That is how the Water Resource Manager and the TAC have it.
Yes, but it had. What I was told at the last TAC meeting is that the Navy would not release it to the public. Well,
not true.
No, I'm sorry. That is true. I was told. Everybody at the TAC meeting heard it.
Who said that at the TAC meeting? Was it the Navy representative at the TAC meeting?
Yeah. What's his name? Steffenborg?
He said the Navy would not release it?
Yes, sir.
This is a non-agenda item, so we can respond briefly to comments. I think that has happened. If you guys maybe could talk more separately.
It's released as far as the Navy's concerned. That's all I have to say.
Could you put that on? I kind of thought that was what was going to happen. It didn't make any sense otherwise. But The Navy representative said it. Can you put that on the website? Can it be put on the website?
Staff?
I said, can it be put on the new website?
Yeah, I can.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Brian.
Okay,
May I make a comment also?
please.
Within the meeting, Stefan did state that it was not yet released at that time, but the release would be coming. And that was back then on the 4th. Of this month.
I apologize. He doesn't have the right information. We've released that. When we release it to the public, we have to do that before we can release it to anyone that's part of this organization. So I'll talk to Stefan. It's been released for months.
Okay, thank you. All right. Please.
Judy Decker. I could certainly second Stan's comment of I've got a secret for this organization, but that's not why I'm here. As you know, I've attended all of the meetings since the formation of this organization and its public meetings. As being an observer, especially after the workshop, I've come to the conclusion that you guys need to pool your resources, monetary resources, and hire a local manager. This would be somebody who would coordinate between Stetson and the board and the public. You have in your JPA the agreement that the three of you, the three local organizations, will share duties. But Mr. Strand was hired as a full-time manager for the city. Mr. Zadiba is a full-time manager for the water district. And the county, Mr. Christensen had a full-time job for the county. And I think you need to hire someone who can work with all of you and coordinate things for you. And I think the workshop was a wonderful example of how it shouldn't have been. Mr. Stetson's organization has a full-time job preparing the plan, and he's getting paid handsomely for it, but he has a lot of work to do in a short period of time. And I would like you to seriously consider what I have suggested. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raymond Kelso. On March 5th of this year, I was in Washington, D.C. in Kevin McCarthy's office. And while waiting for my tour of the White House, on his desk was pistachios. Okay? I was dumbfounded. But then I kind of realized that, being the Burroughs grad that I am, that there's a lot more going on that I know about. And I would like to push for more transparency. I would like to know, for instance, I have a whole bunch of questions as to why. Why? How much is the pistachio industry donating to for his contributions? Maybe we ought to take the $1 million that we got and make that a campaign contributions, and maybe we can get some headway here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Sophia Merck. Everybody calls me Sam. I attended the workshop, and it wasn't included in the minutes. I am also asking for more transparency and more notes to be given to the public. I also would like to ask for the public letters to be made available on the website and so on and so forth. And it's not under the agenda. You have a financial report, but at the workshop it came out that the public really would like a finance committee. and perhaps local. Judy is absolutely correct. So is Stan, so is the rest of us. We really need to be working together, all of us. We have the same drink of water. We need to take care of it, but we also all need to be heard. So please, once again, I'm asking for transparency, and that is part of the GSA. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay, we will close public comment and go to the consent calendar. There was a question on the minutes. So I would like to have us approve the consent calendar minus the minutes.
Can we talk about the minutes and then approve it? Or not?
Whatever you want to do.
Well, usually you would just withdraw that one and approve the rest of the agenda.
That's the way we do it at the city.
And I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda with the minutes removed for further discussion.
Okay.
Second.
Question.
Is there any discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a question actually. Yeah, I had a question actually about the finance report. Who would I direct that question to?
I believe that'd be Alan Christensen.
Okay. Let's see real quick. Oh, that's my wrong briefing. Grab my old notes.
Are you pulling that item? If you want to pull that item too, Bob, why don't we approve the consent calendar less A and C?
Okay.
Would you guys amend your motions?
I'll amend the motion to approve A and C.
I'll second that.
Okay. Lauren? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we will go and talk about, since you're up here, Ellen, let's talk about item C.
Yeah, Alan, my question was, in the report itself, there's an amount of the first DWR reimbursement that was received for the Prop 1 Stress Counties grant, and the amount of $9,818.25 doesn't match any of the claims that were submitted, the amounts of the claims that were submitted to the state, to DWR. So I'm wondering, did the state disallow some portion of a claim?
Through the chair, Alan Christensen with the County of Kern. I'd have to look into that. They do have a retention policy, so they don't reimburse you the full amount. But I'm not sure if that's per. It used to be 10%, and I think it went up. They just changed their retention policy to 20%, so they withhold that until the end. I'm not sure if that's at the end or with each successive payment. So I can get back to you and just send an email to the board on reconciling what's going on there.
Thank you.
Okay, so is there any other discussion on the financial report? Okay, let's approve that. A motion to approve?
I'll move approval. I will move approval of item 3C.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, let's talk about item A, the minutes. What was the concern?
Again, Derek Hoffman for Meadowbrook. Just a brief comment on the minutes, Madam Chair and members of the board. And this is not a criticism of the recording secretary. I want to make that clear. I recognize there's a lot of time and energy that goes into preparing the minutes, and I want to just say I appreciate that effort, not only for this organization, but a lot of the same folks that do the minutes here do the minutes for the member agency groups as well. So I just want to make that point up front. I would like to, however, ask that the board consider revisiting the minutes or looking at them and asking that the minutes reflect the comments from the public consistently. So, for example, if a member of the public makes a comment, I would ask that the comment be summarized to some extent, and that instead of just saying that a comment was made by a certain person. That way the public and the minutes and the record reflect what the comment was. And I recognize we're not looking for a detailed word-for-word summary. That's not the point of the minutes, but just that the public comments are treated consistently. And then second, it has to do with written correspondence. I had submitted a letter on March 14th, and I'll leave a copy with the clerk today. And I'm asking that it be included with the minutes, as with all written correspondence that goes to the board. The purpose for that is to ensure that the public can see the basis for decision making and see the comments that are given. It also goes to the matter of considering the interests of the beneficial uses and users in the basin and the stakeholders that are giving comments. And so again, just asking that they be included with the minutes. And I've noticed that in the past there have been some written letters that have been included in the minutes and others that have not. And I'm just asking that they be treated consistently and included there. And so again, I'll leave a copy of my March 14 letter for the last meeting and just ask that you consider my requests today. Thank you again.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I understand what you're saying. You want the recorder to summarize the comment. Would it be appropriate just to say Mr. Jones talked about this or that? Or because when she's summarizing, some people are a little windy.
Right.
And so does she just pull out the nouns or the adjectives or, because that would be she would have to interpret. So I don't have a problem with it. I just want to help us get the right information, and I agree with you. So how do you see that?
So responding to that question through the chair, I'm just saying, I'm not going to say how it ought to be done specifically, but what I'm saying is the concept is that a summary be given. And where a member of the public speaks and their comments are summarized, then the other members of the public, if they speak, then their comments should also be summarized, and that they just should be treated consistently.
Oh, consistently. That's what we're looking for.
Yes. And,
okay.
I think it should include a short summary.
Understood.
And along that same point, and I'll wrap up, if a letter is submitted, I think the minutes ought to reflect that a letter was submitted. If the letter is not included in the minutes, especially, that would be true. And so, again, I'm not criticizing the recording secretary. No. I'm just asking that be considered for a record keeper.
So another question. So I agree with both of your comments. When people are to submit a letter, should we just say no letter submitted? I don't know what they do everywhere else, but how do you identify the letter? Do we give them numbers or just so-and-so submitted a letter at this date?
I think that's up to you to decide how you want to do it. But to me, the concept is that the letter gets included.
Understood and agreed.
Yeah, thank you.
I would recommend that before we adopt a policy of including letters that are submitted as part of the minutes, that you get a legal opinion on that.
I am going to ask one question. Ron, what we were told last night about how this is being recorded, is this being recorded the same way as our city council meeting is? Yes. All right, let me state for the record then that you can go back to any of these meetings, look at what happened, look at it by specific review, watch the whole thing, or go to time number 2 hours and 37 minutes and 47 seconds. You can do that. The whole thing is now on YouTube, and it is very clear, very open, and everything can be seen and scrutinized as you wish. So that I'm wondering, I'm not summarizing everything that's said, because sometimes we have 15 or 20 comments on every item. My concern is that if you truly want to see everything that's said, now you can go, and if you know approximately the time it was said in the first 10 minutes, the first 30, the last 40, you can go see it, and specifically, and it's very clear and articulate. So I'm just not sure I'm going to say waste, but that isn't what I mean. I don't want to duplicate the efforts that have already been made to make sure that the minutes are reflective of everything that's said. But I also know that now it's on the record, easily seen, and you can go do that in past meetings also.
And just so it's clear, just so it's clear, the only legal requirement of what needs to be in the minutes is a description of the action taken at the meeting. As far as comments made, there are styles of minutes where those aren't even listed at all. They just say so and so spoke, or not even that sometimes. So it's really up to the board to decide how much detail they want to have in there. Sometimes more detail is better. Sometimes more detail creates a situation where you end up at the next meeting editing the minutes all the time. And, well, I didn't actually mean that when I said that, and, you know. So, but that's up for that's a decision of the board.
And we are asking our staff, Lauren, who's donating her time through the Water District, to be the determiner of what is appropriate to put in those minutes. And since I would hate to have that responsibility on my own, but I'm just making that comment. So if you truly want to see everything, you can see it and separate it on the videos now that are on the city's on the GSA's website. So,
Madam Chairman, I would like to second what Mr. Hoffman stated. You have said repeatedly that you are a new organization forming, which is obvious to all of us who have been following this. And you have stated repeatedly that you want public input. And yet, if you do not put at least a summary of the public input into your minutes, you will not remember what they said over time. Hopefully, those of us who bother to come and to bother to speak are offering you constructive ideas that you may use or decide to not use for some other reason, but at least they're there and you can review them. Not everybody has YouTube, and so I'm not sure in this modern era what the legal minutes are. I would think they would still be the written minutes. And if someone bothers to write you a letter and present it to you at a meeting, it should be attached to the minutes for everyone to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, it's Lawrence who's going to decide what the synthesis of your comments are. Okay. Carol?
Carol Wilson. I'm a member of the PAC, but I'm speaking for myself right now. Madam Chairman, board members, I was contacted this week by a member of the board asking me what could be done to make this process more transparent, more smooth flowing. And I would like to point out that all that has to be done is to merely look at the testimony that has gone on this morning and the roadblocks that have been put up by the board to prevent any kind of further transparency or effort to understand what's going on with this committee. Thank you.
Let me state for the record, I was the one who contacted Carol and asked her. And I did not see my questions today as being roadblocks.
I wasn't addressing my comments to you, Peggy. I was addressing them to the board, and I did not mention your name.
I know. That's but okay. I wanted to get it in there so everybody knew not who did it. I did it. And I thought it was a legitimate question. And if you
I think it's a legitimate question as well. But I'm not here to argue with you, Peggy, at all. Thank you.
Okay. Either am I. Thank you.
Sam Merck. Transparency is really, really important. I believe that the letters that are presented here to the board should be part of the board package, should be made available to the public. If perhaps there could be another look, at least have a list of names that people that came up to the stand that took time off from their work, doctor's appointments, whatever, to come and talk to you about transparency, financial committees, or whatever. That should be part of it. And maybe at the end of each name that comes up to speak, maybe you could put, please refer to YouTube. Not all of us know that, but it should be well documented if you're going to use it, especially if it ever comes into court litigation. You are going to need that stuff. So you really, really need to think about it, establish a good policy from everybody. But the community wants to work with you guys, not against you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, is there any other? Okay, now we are going to, we haven't approved item A, did we? With the change in the minutes, that was the comments.
I don't think there was a change.
Well, a question.
Okay.
A question about the minutes.
So I make a motion that we approve item A on the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. The next item is we are going to move 5 as a presentation item. And staff?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, just as a reminder, this item is for presentation purposes only. It will not be received and filed by the board. This is just a presentation for information purposes only.
Excuse me real quick, Madam. May I make a quick comment? The item D with the number 3 for the TAC committee member approval. Would you be able to do that after this item is done?
Did I skip it?
No.
It was approved during the consent.
Oh,
It was
Yes.
approved first, yeah.
My apologies on that.
Okay, thank you. All right. All right. This item was asked, one of our agencies asked for this to be on, and I said, let's go ahead and do it as a presentation so we can hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Madam, did we give a time limit for this presentation?
He asked me how long. I told him, and I said not 5 hours. And he said
there's a lot of room in there. Then
I got it. So what I was, he said, can I do it in 20 minutes? Anthony, is that still?
That is my goal. I've actually set my timer here for 25 minutes, but I can scroll it back to 20. Because what I would really like to do is hopefully if people have questions.
If I could just one second. I appreciate you allowed him that much time. In the future, I would ask that we not allow people that much time to make presentations to us. I'm fine with members of the public making presentations and talking to us and giving us their input, but a lot of what's in this presentation is stuff that will come up at the TAC and the development of the GSP that the people who are on the TAC and Mr. Brown's firm has a seat on that representing a client. All the stuff that's in this presentation is stuff that he should be making at the TAC. I don't know that it's something that we need to discuss or provide direction on. It's going to be process of the development of the GSP. And so I don't see the need to give specific parties 20, 30 minutes of time at a meeting when this is something that will be discussed and debated and developed through the GSP process that will occur at the TAC. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
I know you've agreed to this. We're going to hear this presentation for 20 minutes, but in the future, I don't know that this is the process that we should continue to follow.
I think Mr. Johnson is going to address some of those things, and we are accepting it and thanking you for your presentation, but let's go ahead and do it, and we will talk about it.
I have one comment. I agree that we should limit the length of the presentations, but also there should be an expectation that we can look at your material, ahead of time so that it sort of shortcuts it to the public also. Also, on this topic, Inyo County would like just a few minutes after this to make a couple of comments.
Certainly. All right, sir.
Stopwatch. I will start my stopwatch to keep us on time. Well, good morning, Chairperson Breeden and members of the board and those in attendance here today. Most of you know me. My name is Anthony Brown. I'm a hydrologist with Aqualogic, and I have several clients here in the Valley now where I'm assisting them on various water issues. I'm here today to talk about a discussion paper. Really, this is not a laid-out plan such as a GSP or even the framework for a GSP. This is just a means by which we're hoping to continue the discussion on how we might resolve the water issues facing the Indian Wells Valley. I was told today I may have to face some questions, some tough questions, I hope, as part of that initiation of discussion. I'm getting used to them. I was actually in Washington, D.C. yesterday, testifying on the Hill. Did face some tough questions there about the collusion between groundwater and surface water. And no other forms of collusion, luckily. So I hope that the people in this room are a little more open-minded than perhaps some of the politicians I had to talk to yesterday. If we could move to the next... Can I control the slides here, or should I just say next slide?
Staff, can you address that for us?
That's the one. I think my Apple Watch has a remote. I can change it for you.
I thought that was your transponder.
No, it's a decrease in Apple Watch.
Good.
Thank you.
So as we all know, the Valley faces a variety of water challenges that have been growing for over 50 years here. However, now under Sigma, we're actually going to have to address some of them. And clearly, over time, we're going to have to reduce some of the pumping of fresh groundwater within this valley. The discussion paper simply presents an approach to address some of the issues that will provide for the sustainable management of groundwater within the NAWS Valley in compliance with Sigma. It'll also provide for the long-term viability for the Naval Weapons Station with respect to water, economic stability and continued growth for the community here within Ridgecrest, a means to fund the needed water projects that are going to have to be put in place, and hopefully some long-term water security for Indian Wells Valley. Before I get into it, I do want to talk a little bit about the genesis of this paper. This actually started in a meeting that myself and one of my clients, Mojave Pistachios, had with board member Green and Gleason.
Green?
Sorry, Brown.
Oh my God.
Trees are green and brown, but he's the green member of the board. True, that is true. There was a discussion there about whether there would be any value in putting together some kind of outline of principles of agreement, something that would be akin to this kind of white paper. It was agreed that would be a good idea. However, we weren't certain what the forum would be to generate such a paper. I then subsequently had some discussions with the larger pumpers, the Water District, Mojave Pistachios, Meadowbrook Dairies, and Seals Valley Minerals, and we came together and said, let's try and flush out some kind of discussion paper. I was the primary author in putting it, pen to paper, shall we say, or fingers to keyboard, where all of those parties provided input in the paper. And so that white paper, as it was disseminated about 6 weeks ago, was the product of those discussions, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here today. We don't need this. I think we all know where we are. So in terms of what might be a strategy we could foresee here, basically the discussion paper outlines this essential strategy. It would allow the current pumping to continue for a period while the alternate water supplies that we're going to need, whether they're imported water, alternative local supplies, are developed. This allows us essentially to have a soft landing. It isn't right on day one we start cutting. And this is something that's being basically adopted by most of the GSPs that I'm involved in. I'm heavily involved in the GSP for the Kern sub-basin. In fact, that's why I have to go there this afternoon. And it's something they're looking at because clearly this is all new for groundwater users in the state of California. Coming up with a plan is a tough enough job on its own for those basins that are subject to critical overdraft. But actually the implementation is really going to be tough. So most of them are looking at some kind of soft landing to ease into the reductions that just about every basin in California is going to have to do. In addition to that, we charge some kind of pumping assessment. There has been a discussion about what the fees would be. And this pumping assessment would essentially pay for the management, the studies, the designs, the permitting for these new alternate water supplies. We'd then develop those supplies to offset the pumping reductions. We'd implement some kind of market-driven program that would allow water assignments to be traded. We develop contingency plans for the shallower domestic wells that may in fact face problems between now and when the basin finally achieves sustainability with respect to groundwater. And also we'd obviously develop ongoing conservation plans that incentivize everyone to use less water. Let's talk a little bit about what is the ultimate goal, the sustainable yield. What is that number we're trying to achieve? This basin has been subject to critical overdraft as determined by Department of Water Resources. It requires us to develop a plan by 2020 and reach sustainability by 2040. There may be some flexibility on the end date of that, but that's the target everyone has currently. The sustainable yield is defined as the maximum quantity of water that can be withdrawn over a period of years without an undesirable result. I won't get into any detail. Most of you are familiar with that. It's not necessarily safe yield, native safe yield. Each GSA can determine what sustainable is for their local groundwater basin. It allows some flexibility that it isn't just a hard native safe yield number. Clearly, if you want to stabilize groundwater levels, that is a number you're going to be approaching. So the GSA, in consultation with all the other stakeholders, actually decides what the path to sustainability and what that goal ultimately is, and DWR hopefully approves of that. But clearly in this basin, as in many basins in California, to achieve sustainable yield, the basin water users are going to have to reduce the amount of pumping of fresh groundwater supplies. And to offset that, they're going to have to develop new sources of water somewhere, whether it's imported water, some other local sources of water. But clearly, to meet the current demands and projected demands, those two things are going to have to happen. If we are going to implement reductions, the law requires that we consider the interests of all beneficial uses and users of groundwater. It cannot be arbitrary and capricious. It cannot be, well, we're just going to make this person stop, this person can continue. There has to be an orderly process to do that. So the pumping plan must be fair and equitable. It must take into effect the economic and social factors, and it must achieve those mandates in a reasonable period of time. But hopefully do it in a way that minimizes or removes the risk of litigation and any other additional costs that we might face. This is just simply the pumping within the basin. Right now, we've projected out at 2020 that we would have pumping around about 28,000 acre-feet per year once the agricultural development's fully mature. The basin is basically been pumping at those levels consistently for about the last 30, 40 years, somewhere on average around 26,000 acre-feet per year. Unfortunately, as we all know, groundwater levels have been declining even long before that. The groundwater levels have been declining back, almost 100 years in this basin. They've declined just in the last 50 years about 45 feet, and that has increased almost a foot per year in the last 25, 30 years. This is just one well in particular that demonstrates that type of decline. When we look at the decline, it's clearly related to the fact that we are pumping more water from this basin than the native safe yield. And the more water is being pumped than is coming in. Because of that, we're losing water from storage and groundwater is declining. If we continue at that rate of around 28,000 acre-feet per year, we can see the decline here in red in the coming years, with the key years marked there as 2040 and 2050. And clearly that is not acceptable under Sigma. Continued groundwater level declines and loss in storage is an undesirable result that cannot be allowed within Sigma. So clearly this valley faces some big questions. Can the estimated 2020 pumping rate, roughly what we're pumping now, a little bit more, be maintained for a modest period without causing long-term significant and unreasonable and undesirable results? Can we have that soft landing? How should future pumping reductions be implemented in a fair and equitable manner? And obviously in a way that fosters cooperation and teamwork rather than conflict. What alternate sources can be developed to offset these reductions? How should future groundwater be managed, how should future groundwater management studies be funded? And what happens if some of those domestic wells that are shallower start to run dry or face other problems? These are the questions we have tried to address within this discussion paper. Clearly, a lot more additional discussion, a lot more additional study is going to be needed before we can fully answer these questions. This paper just provides some concepts. So let's look at the first question. How long can the 2020 pumping rates be maintained? The exact volume of groundwater within the valley is uncertain, but it's clear based on the existing studies by the Geological Survey, Land Management, Stanford, and the recent SkyTEM survey that we have in excess of 1,000 feet of fresh groundwater. This valley does have a very, very good groundwater savings account. It's been accumulating for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. So unlike many other valleys in California that really do not have a lot of money, a lot of groundwater in savings, this valley does. Clearly, if the groundwater pumping was looking at 1.2 feet per year in those areas of pumping of decline, with 1,000 feet, we could pump for many, many decades and draw down on our savings. However, that is not allowed under Sigma. You can do it for a period of time, but at some point you must achieve sustainability, which is going to be somewhere proximate to that safe yield. Because that is an undesirable result I've discussed. So luckily, because of the fresh water we have in storage, pumping at those rates can continue for a modest period without causing long-term undesirable results. So what is a pumping strategy that we've looked at? And again, this is not the plan. This is just a concept, some points for discussion. We've looked at, say, pumping for a period of 10 years from 2020 at the current rates or the projected rates for 2020. And then after that, implementing reductions so that by 2040 or maybe through 2050, we achieve the sustainable yield. And we've assumed in the paper here that the sustainable yield is going to be somewhere between the two safe yield numbers that everyone is sort of coming to in consensus, the 7,700 acre-feet per year in the DRI work and the 11,000 acre-feet per year in the ECORP work a few years back. It's probably going to be somewhere between those two numbers. After that, hopefully, 2040 or might be 2050, the pumping will continue pumping of fresh groundwater would continue at that sustainable yield. So how would that look in terms of pumping? As I mentioned, for the last 30 or plus years, we've been pumping at around 26 acre-feet per year. That would continue for 10 years, and then obviously we'd see dramatic declines over a 10-year, possible 20-year period where we try to achieve that sustainable yield number between 7,700 and 11,000 acre-feet. And so that's likely a scenario that we'll be facing within this valley. Dramatic reductions in pumping that this valley has never seen before. What are the advantages of this soft landing? Well, it meets the demand for water in the basin through 2030 from the local groundwater. It allows during that period of time for the alternate water supplies to be developed. They're not going to come online tomorrow, next year, 2020. It's going to take time to get these supplies online. It allows for the imposition of pumping assessments on a higher volume of water, therefore generating more money, to fund the studies and the designs and the permits that are needed for these alternate supplies. It also allows the pumpers to adjust their operations to what they see as the coming reductions. And perhaps, an equally important thing would be it reduces the potential conflict in the near term. Clearly, if we're going to have to reduce from day one, there are going to be parties that have difficulty with that, and it's going to create conflict. This removes that conflict and also fosters a level of cooperation to develop those alternative supplies, that is, work together to solve the problems rather than divide and try and solve the problems. So under this program, what might be the projected groundwater levels? Well, it would result in about an 18 feet of additional drawdown up till 2030, and this is in the areas of pumping, an additional 10 feet by 2030 or 2050. Then after that, essentially, water levels should stabilize. They might be slightly higher in a few areas where there's more excessive pumping, and many areas there won't be declines at all. As we know, in some areas of the valley right now, we don't have declines with the current pumping. One thing we would look at is setting a minimum threshold, which is required under Sigma, below which groundwater levels could not decline. And we've suggested here maybe 40 feet below 2015 levels would be that minimum threshold you could never go below during this period when we're adjusting to the sustainable yield. So this is what that would look like. The pumping is in blue, the red levels, rather the water levels, instead of just continued decline, which we saw in an earlier graph, now we see them starting to stabilize. So sometime after 2040 or between 2040 and 2050, the groundwater levels stabilize. We are no longer losing water from storage. It's similar to what's called Path A within the Sustainable Management Criteria, as issued as a best management practice from DWR, where they see that you're allowed to have continued declines. You do not have to restore water levels under Sigma to 2015 levels, 1915 levels. You just have to have them stabilize by 2040. So this is the type of program that we would see here. Clearly, if we assume the safe yield between 7,700 and 11,000, compared to the 28,000, we are not going to be able to see significant recovery in water levels. All we can do is stabilize those levels in the short term or medium term. What would happen if we do see some of those excess declines? We've said we'll set a minimum threshold of 40 feet. Well, one of the things we've looked at is, there'd be certain trigger points. So if water levels in a certain area decline 25 feet, you'd have to reduce pumping a certain level. If they reduce 35 pumping, you'd have to reduce it even further. And if they got all the way down to 40 feet, you'd have to reduce pumping in that area to the assigned safe yield number. So water levels would stop declining. So how did we look at, or how did we consider that some of the de minimis pumpers in the Navy could be addressed within this concept? Well, first, it's been assumed, within our analysis, that the de minimis users, those are the people that have domestic wells, would continue to operate during this entire period through 2040 at their current rate. Basically, the de minimis users, we'd be encouraging them to adopt some kind of conservation measures, but they would not be forced to reduce their levels unless it appeared that they were pumping more than the de minimis volume. The other thing is we've assumed that the Navy would continue to pump at their current rate. No reductions would be imposed upon the Navy. The Navy would continue to pump through this entire period and beyond 2040 at the current rate they're pumping. So the reductions would have to be then borne. We've talked about where large volumes of reduction here would have to be borne by the other major pumpers. The Water District, Mojave Pistachios, Meadowbrook, and Seals Valley Minerals being the big four, and those are the parties that were involved in the preparation of the discussion paper. They would be bearing the brunt, in fact, nearly all of the reductions that would occur in fresh groundwater pumping within this valley. So how would the actual reductions be actually implemented? We're looking at going from 26,000 on average down to somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 acre feet for these major pumpers. That's an 80% reduction in their pumping. To do that, that's almost 8% per year over the next 20 years that they have to reduce their pumping, because they are under this concept, they're bearing all the reductions. Clearly, their goal is to then offset that with the development of alternate supplies. These parties need the water, and they have the vested interest in developing those supplies to meet their demands. So clearly, we looked at, well, if they're going to have to do these reductions, each of the pumpers is going to be assigned essentially two forms of allocation. What we call the baseline allocation, which is an allocation in water terms, we call it an allocation of the operating yield. That varies year to year. And then there'd also be allocated free pumping allocation, which is essentially their allocation of the native safe yield. And those are two thresholds that are important, because we'll talk about those when it comes to fee setting. So the baseline pumping allocations would be ramped down, essentially. They'd be assigned for that first 10-year period at the current rates. And then from 2030 to 2040, maybe extending to 2050, depending on what the ultimate sustainable yield might be, those allocations of baseline would be essentially reduced every year until those parties had borne all of those reductions. And this is only as it pertains to fresh groundwater supplies. They would not apply an allocation of an alternative supply, because that's something they would be developing outside of the native safe yield. Any pumper that needs more water has a couple of options. They can pump more water and pay more fees, and not just a baseline fee, but pay a much higher fee for pumping more than their allocation. They can purchase or lease, an allocation from some other pumper who maybe doesn't need the water that year, or they can buy water from those alternative supplies that have been developed. Once we start to reduce in 2030, there is also the imposition of potential another fee, what's called the overdraft fee, which means if you're pumping beyond the operating yield that's been assigned for that year, you have to pay a much higher fee. And this is done in most of the basins where I work, and I'm sure Steve could tell you many of the basins where they're working, where there's some structured fee where everyone pays a baseline, and if you want to pump more, you have to pay a lot more to basically allow that basin, in many cases, to buy import water. I work for the Orange County Water District and the Water Replenishment District of Southern California, and what they do is they have two essential fees. They have a baseline fee that everyone pays, and then they have an additional assessment if you want to pump more than your allocation. And the cost of that additional assessment is the same cost as buying water from the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. So they can bring in that water and supplement local supplies. So it's basically, I want to pump more, I'm going to drop the water levels, we'll bring in import water to recharge. And that's the basic concept. What are the alternative supplies that can develop? There is a lot of talk about this. Clearly, there is a potential for developing brackish groundwater. We're looking at an almost identical project on the west side of the Kern Basin, where we represent the water districts over there. We could perhaps try and relocate some pumping within the valley. That's going to be tough. There are some areas where there has not historically been pumping fresh groundwater. We can develop some supplies perhaps adjacent, but I think that's highly unlikely. I don't think in California basins are happy to export water to someone else. There is no surplus water out there where you can go in the market and say, oh, there's tons of water, we can buy it. There's very limited supplies outside this basin. If you look at this basin short, just across the mountain in the Kern Sub-Basin, they're going to be facing massive demand on it, supplies to come from somewhere. So the cost of imported water is going up every year. It will not, if you buy water from outside the basin, even if it's available, it will be expensive water, because you're in a market where simple supply and demand says there's a limited supply of excess water, if you can consider it excess. There's huge demand for it under Sigma. There's been talk about a potential banking project with DWP. Obviously, there's potential for reuse and recycling here in the valley of some of the water, but we've got to basically explore all of these. If we're looking at almost 21,000 acre-feet of reductions, it isn't going to be one answer. Even import water will, if you had access to a lot of import water, it's unlikely to meet that total demand. We're going to have to be developing several, if not all, of the potential alternative supplies that we need. Brackish water is one of them. It is local. Okay, I'm going to try and wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Essentially, though, the development of that supply has to be done in such a way that we don't have undesirable results, because it is within the basin. Particularly, it has to be done in a way that doesn't exacerbate any drawdown in the fresh groundwater areas. It's essentially it's handled differently under Sigma. It has to be handled as a separate management area. That's what we're doing on the west side of the Kern sub-basin. And essentially, you allow a period of interim mining to basically provide a supply that isn't in perpetuity, because it is essentially still mining some groundwater, but allows you some breathing room to develop other sources. I'll brush through this pretty quickly. I talked about the different fee structures. I won't get into detail, but because that's obviously something that's going to be discussed as we move forward, as how this is all going to be funded. There are funds out there. We know about the grants. We know about loan funds. But it comes in local fees, what I call here groundwater extraction fees. We've envisioned 3 types. So I move on. Basically, and this summarizes it, essentially that lower green line is the allocation of native safe yield, what I refer to as the free pumping allocation. The blue line is essentially the operating safe yield, so it's flat for 10 years, then declines for another 10 to 20 years until we meet that sustainable yield. And the fee structure, basically the fees you pay are different depending on where your pumping is within that particular graph. But essentially one of the things is, if you generate fees, those fees, if you think about it, the problem we have is because of excess pumping. But we can now allow pumping to generate the fees to solve the problem. And that's exactly what's been done in other basins. Orange County went into overdraft for many decades because it was done to generate fees that the Orange County then used to invest in spreading grounds and ultimately the groundwater replenishment system that has made the county almost self-sufficient with respect to water. So it allowed the pumping to solve the problem.
How much more do you have, Anthony?
I'm going to jump straight to the end.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what are the advantages of this approach, the soft landing? Well, when you look at the soft landing and you couple that to the fees and the allowance of exchange, a market for the movement of water, it allows time for the pumpers and the community to adjust to the necessary ramp downs. And those ramp downs are going to have to occur. It helped minimize the economic impact on the pumpers and the community. It reduces the risk of potential litigation. It builds the capital through the fees to actually pay for these alternative supplies, which we're going to need. And it incentivizes conservation because it allows, basically either trade of water or people over time to convert from lower to higher valued uses of that water. One thing I want to touch about is what happens if domestic wells run dry. Well, we have considered how we would handle that, from the drilling of new wells, the connection of municipal supplies, or alternate supplies, perhaps connection to your neighbors. A friend of mine has a well in Carmel. 2 of his neighbors had problems with their wells, so he allowed them to connect to his well. That's a good neighbor policy. You can't force that on people, but hopefully people might do that. Or you can establish mutual water companies where perhaps a group of neighbors get together and create a mutual and drill one deeper well. But clearly the goal is to somehow, through this process, make sure that domestic well owners don't run dry and have no source of water. So in conclusion, the valley can continue to pump fresh groundwater at the rates near the current terms in excess of the sustainable yield. However, that can't continue in perpetuity. It has to be reduced at some point to meet sustainable goals. It's proposed under this concept that the pumping continue to 2030. After that, we see dramatic ramp downs to 2040 or possibly extending to 2050. We clearly are going to need a contingency plan of some kind as to how to address de minimis users that might face problems during those periods. The pumping assessment should be imposed to pay for these ongoing studies and the initial design and permitting of capital projects. And in summary, this valley is lucky because it does have a huge groundwater savings account that it can dip into for the next few years to fund long-term economic growth for this community and invest in the projects that will provide the long-term solutions for the water challenges facing Indian Wells Valley. Simply as I said, the strategy allows the pumping that created the problem, that we currently face, to pay for the long-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hey, is there comments from the board? I know, Matt, you wanted to speak.
What I'd like to address is
your mic's not on.
Address is the issue of this won't be towards you. This is you can have a seat. You won't need to answer. This is a discussion about is listed as a discussion about the sustainable groundwater basin, and so Inyo County does have a concern, and I just want to address it here. I'm going to ask Bob Harrington to give a couple of points, and I'll sort of set those up real quick. Any discussions that include importing water into the Indian Wells Valley raise concerns in Inyo County. Anybody that lives here knows that we are located uphill from you, and generally the easiest way to import water is downhill. Our history as a water exporter is not something that we're looking to expand, and my thought is that anytime you're trying to find take water from another basin to move it to a different basin, there's issues that will need to be addressed long term. LA's water export has led to a number of unintended consequences, including restricted economic development in Inyo County and dust production that affects this community as well as the residents that live in Inyo County. I spend a significant amount of my time working on those issues in Inyo County. The Inyo Board has not considered formally the idea of water export to Indian Wells Valley, but today we'd just like to offer what we think will be some of the issues that will need to be addressed.
So I want to reiterate that we're not setting out Inyo County Board policy here. We haven't brought these issues to board yet, but in light of today's presentation, we thought it would be timely to share with you some of the issues that we expect the Inyo Board will be wrestling with. And as Matt alluded to, these are specific to use of the Los Angeles aqueduct, either for a water transfer or the water banking alternative that Mr. Brown presented. So any such proposal would raise a number of issues for the Inyo Board to consider. First, Inyo County has an ordinance regulating interbasin water transfers. This is a conditional use process where a conditional use permit would need to be obtained from the Inyo County Planning Commission. The Planning Commission would issue that permit based on findings that the proposed transfer didn't have unreasonable negative economic or environmental consequences for the county, and that finding would be made based on input from the Inyo County Water Commission and Water Department. And these conditional use permits are appealable to the Board of Supervisors. Second, use of the Los Angeles aqueduct for water wheeling. It's been our observation that Los Angeles drives a pretty hard bargain for such use. That's more a conversation between this water authority and Los Angeles, but we have some experience with Los Angeles, and that's what we've seen. Third, Inyo County's adopted a temporary moratorium on non-groundwater neutral agricultural development in the Inyo County portion of the basin, that being Pearsonville. If a component of sustainable groundwater management in the valley did involve water transfers from Inyo County to elsewhere in the basin. I would expect the Inyo County Board would be re-examining that land use policy in the Pearsonville area. SGMA requires that sustainability plans address the effect of the plan on adjacent basins if water transfer from the Owens Valley groundwater basin to Indian Wells Valley was a component of the plan. Clearly, that would need to be analyzed in terms of the effects of that transfer on the source basin. And finally, the board would be, the Inyo County Board would be considering the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority's forming document, the Joint Powers Agreement, and its requirement that interbasin groundwater transfers be authorized with the express approval of the source basin. So these are all things to keep in mind as you examine the alternatives involving use of the LA Aqueduct and groundwater transfers from Inyo County. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Is there any other board comment? Go ahead.
Where you at, Anthony?
Still here.
Oh, you don't have to get up. You can sit down. No, just kidding. Thanks for. I know the jet lag and all that stuff. You look pretty good. You know.
Well, thanks, Peter. You look good too.
Oh, thank you. I did my hair for the day, so I just wanted to thank you for your talking points. I like the fact that you gave us so many to look at, and I also like the fact that we're getting feedback already, even before you presented it. This is really good information, because if we're talking about importing water, and we've been talking about that forever, it'd really be kind of nice to know what the impact would be or what the wrinkle would be in the future. So my thought is all the data we get, the faster we can confirm that it's viable or not, it kind of helps to save a ton of money. So, okay, so let's say that importing costs, $1 zillion and it's not possible. Well, then we better come up with a better idea. So then we look at cloud seeding or something else. Point is, this is good. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Inyo County. I appreciate this. I didn't know you guys had a moratorium on ag in this part of the basin, so I appreciate the information.
And thank you, Board Member Green.
Well, okay. Any other board comments? Commander?
The only thing I want to point out on here, and this isn't in your presentation, but in the paper itself, which is part of the agenda, it talks about the 1,500 acre feet estimated current usage, and it tends to associate it with federal water rights. So I just want to caution anyone for establishing federal water rights. That certainly isn't done in this forum or via a white paper. So
no,
I know that wasn't your intent. That is certainly not the federal water right. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we thank you for that report, and we're going to go on then to item number 4. We wanted to give staff the opportunity to make the comment. Are you going to make those comments? I mean, if you're not, then I will allow public.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
Probably just briefly, if to make a comment. We received this discussion paper. It's had a couple different times. We've received the discussion paper many months ago, and I got it. Don sent it to me, and I reviewed it. I was concerned about it when I got it, certainly, because it was, in my view, was getting way out ahead of some things that we needed to do. It was interesting information. It wasn't something that we hadn't thought about or talked about internally about where we might go. So I wasn't alarmed at the concepts, but just putting those concepts out for discussion, I was concerned that it was certainly premature for this group and the board to be talking about, because we had a lot of work to do. So my biggest concern with having it out there like the way it is just and I'm fairly new here, but just understanding the audience that we have and understanding the concerns of all the different people, all the different folks here, is that I would not want, and there was a good discredit, I mean, it was a good qualification that Ron provided on what it's here for, but I would not like to see this polarize anybody that might be affected by the concepts, because they are just concepts, they're discussion. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We're going to address, effectively, we're going to address all of these issues over the months coming forward in the forums that we're talked about through the TAC and the PAC, so it's all going to be there. And I guess my only concern is not from a technical standpoint, even though we're supposed to be the technical people. It's really from the almost the political. It's the outreach. It's working together in the transparency. It's just to make sure folks know that from my perspective and doing my job, this isn't something that's new to us. None of these concepts are new. As Anthony pointed out, the concepts that he's talked about, we use on all kinds of different bases. We've done this before. We've done it other places. So there's lots of ways to do this. This is going to be a challenge. This one is going to be a challenge because there is a big reduction needed or a lot of water to come in. We all know that. So putting it out there and saying that to me is not that big a deal. But I just don't want it to polarize anybody. For the folks that the large ag, for example, or the Navy or the domestics or anybody else, to polarize them to think that, oh my gosh, they're headed this way already. Or they're talking about something that we can't deal with and start to put walls up, because we really do, as Anthony pointed out, we really do need to talk together and figure out what the best way is. And I agree 100%. I've looked at it. I've done the back of the napkin many, many times trying to figure out how we're going to get where we need to go. I agree with Anthony 100%. It's going to take a lot more than one way to get there. There's going to be a lot of different things we're going to have to put on the table and figure out if they work, and a lot of working together to see what will work. So other than that, I was approached and said I had no problem talking about it. That's kind of how it got on this agenda, which is a little bit my fault. But I don't have any problem talking about this stuff because it's stuff we're talking about already. Just I want everybody to kind of relax on the concepts. That's not, we're certainly not taking it as gospel in any direction at all. It'll all be talked about going forward. So
that was why it was a presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Any other comments?
Yeah, if I may, just before we open it up for public, I wanted to thank Mr. Brown. I want to thank the major pumpers who I applaud you for thinking about what this was going to take for us to develop this GSP and to achieve sustainability in this basin. And I applaud you for thinking ahead, even though that may not have been where we were yet with the development of the GSP, that you were thinking ahead in terms of what your positions were going to be. I think that was smart of you. And I want to just reiterate that some of the questions I asked at the beginning about process and the amount of time we provide to this kind of discussion really goes to not trying to be not be transparent about this, but it goes to what Mr. Johnson just mentioned, which is that we have, as a board and as an agency, as the authority, have established a process. And we have established a process for meaningful participation of the public. And just as Mr. Johnson said, I want to be careful that we don't create a situation where we invite presentations that look like we are going down a specific path. I saw correspondence after this was agendized indicating that the board had asked for this, and this indicates the board's going a specific direction. I don't want that to happen. We need to have a good discussion, a good debate at the TAC about the technical issues that are going to be raised in the GSP and that the major pumpers are already thinking about in this discussion paper. So I just wanted to clarify, I'm not about quashing discussion. It's just that I think we've established a process. We need to follow it to ensure that we have the most success in developing a GSP that does consider everybody's point of view and that people feel comfortable providing that input in that forum. I just wanted to make that clarification in terms of my earlier questions.
I would like to add that when the request was made, there was some discussion that this just did not follow the established procedure. And I understand that, but as was pointed out, this was simply a discussion item. It is not an advocacy program, perhaps on their part, but it isn't on this board's. And we are looking at it to say, thank you, we appreciate your input, and we are grateful that you took the time to do so. In the future, I want us to follow the normal procedure to put things on the agenda. And that way, everybody understands where we're coming from at the same time. Okay. Peter?
So I actually agree with both of you for the most part, but I put that but in there. So what I'd like to do is actually come up with a better process. I think the process we have kind of stinks because it does keep people from being heard. And that's why we had the workshop, was to daylight people being heard. I really appreciated that, and I really like the fact that people put it in writing. And to me, all data is good. Even bad data is good because you could say, here's why. And my job as a board member is to understand why. Why is it good? Why is it bad? It's your guys' job as totally braining people that understand water to tell me why it's good or bad. So I'd like us to look at a process where anybody can give us an idea, and it's brought through. I do understand that the TAC cannot receive any information or any project until the board agrees to the project or the information or whatever it is. So we said that you can do this, but the TAC can't come and say, can we do this? Or maybe they do or maybe they don't. But in the past, it's like, no, you can't do that. We haven't told you yet or given you permission. So I'd like us to look at a process where people like Anthony or anybody can have information, and how do we vet that? How does it come through without being, saying, no, this isn't good, without it being actually validated that it's good? So I'd like a process where, and I don't have a problem with it going through some chain of command, but I like a process where all information from anybody can be evaluated and categorized and maybe put through some kind of a matrix where you go, well, we've already looked at that. On the water district side, sorry, these microphone stands are really short. I don't know why that is. Anyways,
yeah. They're long.
Yeah, thanks. It's the it's the chair. So anyways, the deal is I just want a better process so everybody can be heard. I love the letters we got from the workshop. I would like to see those come forward through someplace as a discussion points to be run through the committee, subcommittee mill, and that we track them so that we don't lose track of what people are asking, and they can see that they're being heard, and they can see that we've considered it, and they can hear why and why not. That's my only goal. So however you guys want to invent that, it's fine with me. I just want to make sure there's a process for data to flow, and however it works is fine, as long as the people that are wanting to be heard are heard, and that we don't lose track.
Please.
Thank you, Peter. I just would also state that however we tweak our process, that we've put a lot of stake in staying on schedule. We've developed a POAM. It's identified when certain issues will be brought up and discussed. And I agree with you that we should accept and consider all input and not have barriers to that. But we have a short timeline. We've established that work plan. If this board believes that work plan is not right, then we can have that discussion. If we believe that staff is not managing this process correctly and is not being transparent and open and welcoming of the public and their participation, then we can request a workforce performance evaluation of our staff and have that discussion and make sure they're clear what our expectations are and what their goals are to get their work done. So it worries me if somebody believes that we have set up barriers to providing information. We have, granted, I get some people are going to want to bring things up at a certain time, and it may not be within our plan, but we have an obligation to get this GSP done by a certain date. So we have hired Stetson and Mr. Johnson and his team to develop that work plan, and I want us to caution us to losing sight of staying on track.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments? Okay. Don, you said you wanted something.
Yes, Chair Breeden and board and public. I think the presentation is valuable. It's obviously very premature. The domestic well owners also have put together a plan, and we've kept it to ourselves because there really wasn't a proper time yet to bring it forth. I think that the plan that has been offered, the white paper, is based on a number of fairly serious misconceptions about how the basin actually works, and I'm not going to stand here and try to go through any of that. I wasn't given 20 minutes to stand before you. However, I will make some direct comments on things that the white paper contains. The idea that somehow we need to accommodate the de minimis wells, de minimis pumpers in their wells, because they might go dry is not correct. The de minimis wells have been going dry for quite some time. That is not something for the future. It's actually happening. It has happened. And the deepening is a major industry in this valley right now. The other thing that I need to talk about a little bit is the idea that we have this huge amount of fresh water in storage. If you look at, for example, the e-logs that were done with the 10 Bureau Reclamation wells, you will quickly discover that there are, in virtually every well, zones of poor water identified by the electric log data. And the idea that we can pump additional water, fresh water, and everything will be just fine is ignoring the contamination that occurs when we overpump and the poor water contaminates. That's right there. It's not coming from somewhere else. It's right in the aquifer above or below where the wells are perfed. That contamination will ultimately limit the water we can pump. It has nothing to do with the fact that in some wells there's high quality water at 2,000 feet. And the process I'm talking about is going on, has gone on everywhere in this valley from the early days. Most people don't realize that the early fields in this valley were basically damaged irreparably and are now abandoned. The Walmart, the new Walmart, sits on the site of the old Bowman Ranch. That from the 20s up into the 50s was a productive alfalfa operation. The water levels declined, the water quality declined, the alfalfa finally couldn't thrive, and it was abandoned. The well that the white paper identifies, there's a lot of, I would say, misidentified information in that white paper, and I'm not trying to provide a lot of detail, but I'll give you one example. One of the wells that has been identified in the white paper is called the Bucket Well. And it's a very interesting well in that it has history going back to the 60s. The well has been identified in the white paper as being typical of a well in the areas that have been heavily pumped in the valley. Actually, it is on the southeast fringes of the basin. It declined about a foot or a little bit over a year for 40 years. And the well in its present state is dry. It's not typical of a well in the main part of the basin. It's typical of an overdrafted basin, period. The well is dry. So I think that along with a careful look at alternatives, we need to be very careful about the data that we, in fact, are trying to incorporate in these discussions. The TAC is the place where all of that should be taking place, and the fact that this paper was never run before the TAC for reasons that have been discussed here, I understand, but that paper should not have been given here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Okay, is there any other comment? Please try to keep it in your 5 minutes if you can, please, and thank you.
Yes, I am concerned about this white paper because it contains so many errors. People get a hold of things like this and proceed to say it's the gospel truth, when in fact it is not. Don brought up simply one of the errors that is in it. It's full of errors. The other comment I wanted to make is Water District customers, one of the major pumpers, of course, customers have already saved somewhat over 20% of former pumping.
40.
40%?
Yes.
Per year?
We reduced production by 40%.
20.
I think perhaps the other major pumpers need to take a really hard look at what they are doing. How much farther are you going to cause the 11,000 or so customers that the Water District has? You need to present papers like that in committee before they come forth. And the same was true with the workshop paper also.
Thank you.
Alan Christensen with the County of Kern. Mr. Gleason is not here today. I don't want to speak for him, but I can share with you some sentiments that he communicated to us, mostly having to do with process. And it was not our suggestion that this item be discussed. It was at this meeting. Absolutely, people have a right to share their opinions, but government works best when it's done in an orderly fashion. Let me remind you that some months ago we had a member of the PAC that actually proposed something to the other extreme that would stop pumping in a drastic manner immediately. And we advised that not be discussed because it was premature, because it would be being discussed in a vacuum, without perspective, and not the right time. As a professional in government, let me give you an example of what shouldn't happen. For instance, with a city, and I've got a person here that does planning commissions. If a project were to be proposed, and this is basically a project, it's some form of that, and it was supposed to go to a planning commission first. First, it would go to the staff, then it would go to a planning, and once the staff had processed it, then they would and looked at it and be able to present it. It would go to a planning commission. It's a bad idea to bypass the planning commission and present things that should go through other processes and go to a policy making board before they've gone to those other groups. And because it sets up expectation with the public, it sets up expectations for the elected or appointed policy making body who has seen things before it's time. And I would encourage you to trust your water resource manager, you've hired to do this. I would encourage you to trust your PAC. I would also, on a substantive item, I would ask you, again, this should have been processed, but you hear the words equitable, and there's no discussion of water rights. Equitable in some person's mind may mean something. Maybe there's this belief that everybody gets that equitably water is going to be divided up or allocated in some equitable manner. This is an administrative adjudication of the groundwater basin that will take into account, as we understand it, water rights. And SGMA does not reduce water rights in any way. So again, I feel uncomfortable that this is setting up expectations, that you're not getting the pros and cons. And again, I wish this would have been processed a different way. Having said that, I appreciate your time and thank you.
I'd like to respond, Ellen. I take the responsibility for allowing it to go on because one of our members asked for it specifically, strongly, and wanted it on there. We talked about the process, and that's why I wanted it as a presentation, so it was nothing more than that. There is nothing set in stone. There is nothing approved, disapproved. It is simply an item that was given to us. If having that presentation gave it more credibility than some of you may have wanted, my apologies. I wanted to honor the request of one of our members.
Let me add. It's a good point. Here's this white paper or whatever you want. This proposal was given to you some months, maybe a month or two ago, and you heard it. Was it January? You heard it, and now you're hearing it again in much more detail. I don't know how many people get that many bites at the apple. Everybody has public statements, and I appreciate your response. I know it is. You have the right to do what you did. I do. You have the right to do what you did, but there is public statements for folks, and there are many people that speak in opposition at public statements. They only get a short amount of time, so I think it's important that you understand the importance of process. So I've said enough. I appreciate your position. It's a difficult one, but I wanted to keep that, have you reminded of that. So thank you.
We will follow the process in the future if it comes back down to my decision.
We did follow the process. Wes Kastenstein, domestic well owner. The concern I have is that the public may walk out of here with some misconceptions and what's essentially a marketing effort with the technical foundation not ever having been reviewed. An example would be some folks have done a back of the envelope, or it could have been a back of the napkin calculation that shows that the 7,000 acre feet recharge, if that is indeed an accurate number, may just be enough for health and safety in this valley with no irrigation of any kind. If we're going to worry about investments, we need to worry about the investments the Navy's made, the investments everybody's made in their home in this valley. An allocation for health and safety, if it's also done within the workplace, should protect all of those investments. And I think you're going to find when it comes to uses and users, you will need to give health and safety the first priority of the available recharge. And I think you will find that imported water will be required for any irrigation of any kind, including my house and yours. And so I think that's the dead reality you're dealing with. It's also of interest to note that when you look at the pumping chart that was presented, the idea is that was presented was to limit pumping at the 2020 level. On that chart, you can see, leading up to 2020, you can see the benefits that have been reaped by the savings that the Water Board has done. All the citizens, you can see the pumping levels come way down, and then starting today, the proposed plan, they ramp right up, eating up all of those sacrifices that have already been made to this much higher 2020 level. So from a starting point, the investments that have already been made in conservation are wiped out by this plan as a starting point. So just a couple of observations. I don't know how we roll back the damage that may have been done in giving the public a rosier picture than maybe is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sam Merck. I appreciate the presentation, and I take it only as a presentation, as a white paper.
It isn't a white paper, even though it was called that, because a white paper has connotations.
Okay.
It is
discussion paper. I fully appreciate the work that Anthony Brown has done in regards to that. I also appreciate the fact that Matt brought up the fact about the moratorium in the Pearsonville area. I went to that meeting, and I was pleasantly surprised and happily surprised when Inyo County stepped up and said, there will be a moratorium. And I'm surprised that some of the residents in this area weren't aware of the fact. I also know that we have to go through a certain process of vetting and for all documents. And it's difficult when the TAC is told one thing, that they can't do something until they get the permission to do something. So maybe, and this is probably the first time in my life I've ever agreed with Peter Brown.
Oh, my God. Hey, you got the last name right.
At least I got your last name right. But maybe we should look at that process a little bit better, and maybe there is a way that we can do that better. But I take it for what it's worth, and I look at all documents as much as I can. And thank you for looking at it. And I don't think it's maybe making premature decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
My name is Stuart Fields. I'm a private well owner, and I want to thank.
I can't hear you very well.
Oh, my name is Stuart Fields. I'm a private well owner, and I'd like to thank Peggy for having this presentation made today. I've attended a lot of these meetings. I've read minutes and agendas from a lot of these meetings, and this is going to be the first time I left here with that feeling that maybe this group has something to do with mitigating the overdraft. I've never heard those words used in any of the agendas or any of the meetings. I've heard a lot about the Brown Act and the rules of engagement, Robert's Rules of Orders, and all the rest of that stuff that's been going on for years. Now, I don't agree with some of the points brought up by this discussion paper, but at least you have a discussion paper that discusses things that lead to mitigating the overdraft. Now, there's only two ways to do that. One is to decrease pumping severely. The other one is to import water a lot. Now, this discussion paper at least talks about that. I've been to I don't know how many of these meetings that those items were never discussed. Thank you again, Peggy, for allowing this gentleman to present this. And it may be a discussion paper, but at least it's out in the open that there may be some effort necessary to mitigate the overdraft. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Paul Nugent, and I want to thank you, Peggy, and thank you for allowing the discussion paper to be presented. As I look across the people up here sitting up here, I only see one group that really is substantially pays the cost that you guys are proposing. I'm part of the group that does pay for the cost. And I think the paper came with review by the major pumpers and those that will be paying the bills. And I think I can at least speak for myself, is I think we've been not part of the process. And I do appreciate us having at least some way to give you our ideas. And we're not trying to run over anybody else. We're not saying that we want to control the process, but we would like to be included in the process without having to be kept in the dark. And so I appreciate the paper being presented. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other comment? Okay, thank you. We will then now go on to our Water Resource Manager's report and your discussion item.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Hopefully, we got a fairly brief Water Resources Manager's report. Jeff Helsley from my office here. You all know Jeff. He's going to provide a discussion on a little bit of a presentation discussion on the poem and some of the things we're dealing with right now. An update on the poem and some of the things we're dealing with. And then I've got a short report on the Prop 1 grant and some of the things, and just in general, some of the things that we're doing and that are coming up. So hopefully we'll keep this brief. Go ahead, Jeff. Thanks.
I can't read that.
Morning, Chair Breeden and members of the board.
It's in your packet, too.
Oh, wait a minute. I got to turn on my monitor.
I do want to give an update on where we're at on the plan of action and milestones and the significant issues that come out of that. Probably starting with currently the most significant issue is getting the existing DRI model updated and suitable for use on the GSP. We discussed at the last board meeting that the Navy was getting the funds authorized for DRI to do that work. Those As I understand it, those funds have been approved, and the last that I heard, which was as of last week, the wheels were turning on the contracting for that, getting that finalized. Don't believe it's done yet. That is, one of the critical path items. Not knowing when that was going to start, this schedule shows it starting at the beginning of the current month, which has not occurred. So as soon as we do know when that work is going to start, we will need to update this, and we will need to look at what impact that has on the schedule and the work that is planned. We may, and are currently looking at, maybe adjustments in the planned work to try and make everything, the significant items that we need to get done, get them done. We would come back to everybody with any changes in schedule or the planned work. The issue, I think, that we're looking at now with getting DRI authorized is largely due to the continuing budget resolution, which kind of held up a lot of the funding. We have been looking, beyond this current work task with DRI. There is more work planned for DRI in the future, later this year and early next year. Some of the critical work at modeling the alternatives. We're revising the model now so it's suitable for use in the groundwater sustainability plan. And then later this year, after we talk to the TAC about what kind of options we want to model for achieving sustainability, DRI is scheduled to do the modeling so we can look at the impacts of those actions. We're kind of looking ahead and saying, what if we run into some problems with that funding so we don't kind of run up against it like we have this time and having to look at how to make adjustments now. So I don't know if we're going to bring back at this point on potentially changes in schedule or work, but we are looking forward. The other significant items, if we could go to the next page. Do I have control? Oh, there it is. The red bars up there at the top, that's the work that's being done on let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. That is the future work I was talking about, when we will be modeling the alternatives. We haven't, that's as I say, later this year and into next year. If we go to the next page, is the point I wanted to make. And up towards the top, those two little red bars up there, that's in this time frame. That's work that's going on now on evaluating options for bringing imported water into the basin, which has been discussed quite a bit today, and options for increased use of recycled water in the basin. So the options for increasing supply to the basin is work that's going on right now and is also on the critical path. Those are the main points that I wanted to make out of this, and there are copies available.
Are you done, Jeff?
I'm done.
Okay.
Pardon me?
Can you make the font bigger? I know you can. It's got to fit on the sheet.
Yeah, a lot of
we could add more sheets.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure Commander Longbottom will have some comments. Other people have some comments. I just wanted to point one thing out for the audience too. We're talking about a lot of different things. I think I talked about this at the workshop too, and I'm sure a lot of you were here for the workshop. Just pointing out the work we're doing on the modeling going forward, and some of the work we're working with with the Navy and DRI, and this is an attempt to show we're making progress, because we are making progress in getting some things, getting over the hump on some things. One of the issues that has come up is if we have to if we have to hire an outside consultant, how should we do that through the authority? Should we do it through Stetson? Should we do the authority? How should we do that? We have guidance now. Legal counsel has suggested that it should be through the authority. We have a couple of items coming up that we will probably be bringing back to the board for approval at the next meeting. One of them is a contract with DRI. We've help from Commander Longbottom. We've gotten authority to contract directly with DRI. We do have an agreement in place. I've already modified it so that it would be between the authority and DRI. Based upon our coordination with the Navy and Commander Longbottom, we're working. We have a scope and budget for what needs to be done. I think we have an understanding now about what commitments the Navy can provide going forward for that work, and if it likely at this point doesn't match the scope and budget and the funding that we have under Prop 1, so there may be a shortfall. But either way, we're going to be bringing that back to the authority and showing the authority two paths. I was talking to Mr. Green this morning, and I'm
going to be Mr. Green for the rest of my life.
It's amazing he picked a color when he mismeasured me today.
Actually, green's my favorite color.
Anyway, it's going to be an issue of whether it's a go or no go on some of the work. And if we have to cut the scope back, one of the areas that's going to be cut back in will be our coordination and some of the work DRI might be doing with the TAC. I know that's not a place we really want to cut things back, but depending on our funding, we'll have to look at that. But we'll do it two ways. And if we may need to have some additional funding, from the authority through the assessment to pick up that gap. But we will get through that. And we should be bringing that agreement back to the board at the next meeting. And the second one had to do with an RFP under the disadvantaged communities work, the stuff that's fully funded with no matching funds. There's a provision under the Prop 1 funding to hire a consultant to look at conservation in the disadvantaged areas. We certainly be working with Dawn and the Water District on their procedures, their programs to make sure they're consistent. But a contract needs to be let. Again, it's going to be let through the authority. We're reworking that so that it'll go out. We should bring that back to the board, probably through legal counsel. We'll bring that back to the board at the next meeting, those two items. So let you know we're making progress. Some things that we didn't know how to do, we think we know how to do now, and they'll be coming back to the board. And I don't, if anybody has questions for Jeff on the poem.
Sorry. You have your first. Did you sell?
No, I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Stetson, or Mr. Johnson, sorry, everybody knows, even with the delay for the award on this item, we still anticipate being done by the completion date. There's enough time in there that this is not going to hold up the completion on the critical path. And then, while we have money secured for doing that line item, what we wanted to do, as we mentioned before, is work with the GSA and work with Stetson to be able to let you contract directly with DRI to run scenarios on the model so that whatever you come up with that you want to fund, you can do without having to go through the Navy. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we have, for lack of better expressions, donated this model for the effort of the GSA, and we want you to be able to use it as you see fit to run it and use it. What I am still trying to do is I have still asked for additional funds should there be a need to modify that model in the future. But we're hoping this is the only time we're going to have to model it. Hear what we're doing now. Change it anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Commander. We are on the same page. We are on the same page, and it actually, for the audience on the board, it makes a lot of sense to get this formality out of the way for the future. Using this model, coordinating directly with DRI, this is a formality we can get out of the way. So going forward, we won't have these holdups. It'll just be a matter of providing the funding. We can go forward. In the long term, we're going to need to have that anyway. So this is good.
Okay, is there any other board comments?
Just one more.
Please.
I know I kid a lot sometimes, but this is like a huge amount of information, and it makes me feel like I'm not that smart because I'm really, I can get the fact that it's moving and I can see trends. So can't see this back here, and I can see this kind of. Is there a way with just the salient points that you're talking about is that we can just broadcast those or bring them up or whatever, and we can always refer to this incredible, complex, awesome plan that you put together, but there's only like 3 points or so that we really wanted to see or needed to see. Can we do that? So it's like, simple and...
We had started with a much simpler
overview. This is a long bottom driven equation. Then I totally retract everything I said and forget about it.
I think the point is if you're only looking at the 3 things, you can't see how the changes to the 3 things affect the 16 things down the road. So he's right on. This is good stuff.
Thank you, Commander. Is there any other board comment?
Just one other quick thing, and this really ties back to the presentation earlier. I want to let folks know that one of the things that we've also done is we've taken that white paper, the discussion paper. Boy, that was bad. I shouldn't have done that.
Called the green paper.
I shouldn't have done that. The discussion paper, we've taken that, we've looked through our schedule, and we identify things that we're going to be looking at through the TAC, and the board going forward over several months. It's not clear to folks looking at that list when and how we're going to be addressing a lot of the concepts that are in the discussion document. So we've gone through and bullet pointed under those items when those specific items that are mentioned, approaches, concepts that are mentioned in the discussion document. We've identified when they will be presented. And I think in future presentations, probably to the TAC, we'll provide that so everybody can see it, that we are, given the confidence that we are going forward. I think it was actually Keith Lemieux, the attorney's suggestion that we're going to be looking at these things, let people know that we're going to be looking at these things and when. So that's one of the things that we've done, and we'll probably bring it to the PAC to show people at the next, the TAC, the next TAC meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there any public comment?
Hello, Derek Hoffman from Meadowbrook Dairy. Appreciate the report that was given today. I hear a theme that gives me some concern, and I hope I'm misinterpreting. Maybe I am, but the theme I'm hearing is that the TAC may be excluded potentially from reviewing the model. And I hope that's not the case, but I hope that the TAC will have a role to review the model. I think that's what we've talked about in the past, and I'm expecting that will occur, because the model itself will form the basis of a lot of the most important decisions that the GSP will require. And so there's a level of transparency there and TAC input and review that will need to occur. And I know we've had seen some really good discussions occur at the TAC level about that question. So I just want to make sure that as you're talking about this contract negotiation or talking about the role and getting the model reviewed and put together, that it involves an appropriate level of TAC review and involvement. So thank you.
Derek, I'd like to say something here. The TAC and the PAC, and I'm speaking for myself, but I think I can speak for the entire board. If I don't, somebody tell me, are the two most important committees, even though they're the only ones. They're the two most important committees to get this going and to develop it and have input and to consistently say that I think we're cutting out TAC, I think we're cutting out PAC, is just not fair and not true. They are integral in getting this process to the end. They are going to be those that help make this happen, and I can't express how important they are to this whole process. So, frankly, and if it sounds ticked off, I am, in this respect, that we hear this all the time, and because we hear it does not make it true. What is true is that we cannot do this without them.
I agree. Thank you, Madam Chair. The TAC and the PAC are very important to the process. Thank you for confirming that.
Hey, can I ask a quick question on that one? To my knowledge, the TAC has reviewed the model. DRI has done a presentation. The base model has been put in front of any number of people as well as posted. So there was a question Stan brought up, which Stefan came in a little late, so I talked to him. So we'll get that sorted out. But, yeah, we'll get that posted. The update that was recently done to the model is public knowledge, and we'll get that posted for everyone to see. But to my knowledge, aside from that loose end, there's no super secret thing going on with the model. We donated it over a year ago, and it's the whole point of it is for this board to use to get to a GSP. So I'm kind of at a loss on those comments. Over.
Thank you. Stan, did you?
Yes. I was going to go to the next item.
Okay.
On my
You
report.
have another item?
Just.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Is that okay? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. The next item under the under the report is the Prop 1 funding, and I think again some of this was reported at the workshop, but I want to make sure everybody's aware. Formal award was made, and the authority did get the full award that we described, which is good. We understand just from talking to DWR folks this week that there is a letter being prepared for the formal awards. We should be receiving. We haven't got it yet. You folks haven't got it yet, but a formal award letter. That award letter will provide that a response needs to be returned back to DWR within 30 days accepting the award, which we will be coordinating with the board to make sure that the board authorizes however we need to do that. But we'll make sure that that is done no later than the May meeting so that we have that authorization, assuming that the award is consistent with the Prop 1 application, which I'm sure it is. The award letter will either include a draft agreement or reference the template agreement that we already have. I've already gone through the template agreement to see what workload is required, the administrative effort, whether we do it or whether staff does it. So we have a good idea of the work required to administer that Prop 1 funding. And we provided that template to Keith, legal counsel. I know, Keith, you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. One heads up on looking at it. They've already they notified us this week that you can't change anything. So you can look at it and say it looks good, but they've said no changes are accepted. So it's their agreement, and we have to live with it. But I still would like you to look at it. So that's limited. So we should be able to get the letter and the agreement and get that turned around, and hopefully we'll be getting this agreement in place and going soon. One of the first items they have as a task once we get the agreement done is a detailed work plan. They want a detailed work plan presented. As most of you know who looked at the Prop 1 application, we did a detailed work plan. And in fact, when we looked at our detailed work plan compared to the other applications, ours was really a lot more detailed. However, when they scored it, it was the only area that they didn't give us full score. And when we lost, I think, 2 points, it was in the work plan. So we need to figure that out. But we will get a work plan done as soon as the award is done and get that moving. So that's the Prop 1 funding. Things are moving forward. And I mentioned this earlier with the group, but this is for the audience too. Our goal in this whole Prop 1 funding is to make sure that the state is never waiting for us, that we're waiting for them. So we want to turn things around as fast as we can to make sure we're always waiting on them to get this thing going. That's how we're approaching this. So, and just a couple other items just for update for everybody. Adam is going to give a report on the TAC meeting where we made the second presentation that's on recycled water, conservation, and also alternative water and imported water. And I just wanted to point out that, Stuart has mentioned before in emails about not talking about pumping reductions or alternative water supplies. We are purposely not talking about pumping reductions just for the reasons we talked about this morning about the presentation, just because we all know something's got to happen, but it's not the time. It's not timely. It's premature. But we are talking about alternative water. We're talking about conservation. We are talking about imported water. We are moving well ahead on alternative water supplies and conservation efforts. The brackish water study, we're moving forward on all of those things because they have to be done, and we are working on that. So those are happening at the TAC. We've been 2 or 3 months into that. Adam will provide a quick update on what we did at the meeting. I want to let folks know here that at the next TAC meeting, our goals are for both of those presentations is to go to the next step, which is really to look at potential projects, project priorities, start to identify which are the highest priority projects. We've gotten input that says, which we believe the same thing, that all of them really need to be looked at and documented because they may not be a high priority now, but we need to have enough detail to come back to those later on, depending on where we're at after we implement the higher priority projects. But we are focusing on the high priority projects first for both recycled water, conservation, and alternative water supplies. We plan to bring cost information back and some overview of overall feasibility of the different projects based on priority. So that's where we're going to come back. We tend to streamline this thing and start to bring this more to a head as we go forward. One of the other items, which I don't think Jeff even knows about yet, but I kind of thought about it this morning, is I'd like to be able to come back to you folks with an assessment, a reasonable assessment of what the conservation efforts have been so far. Hearing the water district cutting back 40%, I mean that's huge. We need to document that information and bring it back. I know we want to, the large ag folks, we want to talk to you folks and see where you've been, where you were, where you're at, what we're doing. We need to find out where we are on all of this stuff. So it's timely to start talking to you folks and maybe gathering some of that information, some of the efforts that have been done. If there's cost associated with other efforts, let's find out what it is and find out how it might fit in the plan, how we might finance it or fund it. But we need to get that stuff pulled together because certainly conservation from my experience, conservation is one of the cheapest ways to reach your goals. We're not going to get there just on conservation, but it's one of the cheapest ways to get to your goals is conservation. So we'll be doing that going forward for recycled water, imported water. One other item, and this was really tied again directly to the workshop. There was a lot of criticism out there, and let's back up. There was a lot of comment out there. It wasn't necessarily criticism. I back up a lot. I back up. It wasn't criticism, and I didn't take it as criticism because I knew what we did. In regards to presenting information on well identification, owner identification, and where we were going. It was really, and I said it at the workshop, it was really there just for information to make sure folks know that the board is actually talking about a pumping assessment. They haven't done it yet. It's down the road. But they're talking about it. We try to let people know that you need to be involved. This is this is what we know, and it was done quickly. You're all correct. It was done with the information we had at the time. It was done quickly. We've been working on it ever since to try and make it as accurate as possible. Some of the places where we're collecting information and getting the data we've talked about with the health departments. Lorelei provided information. We've gotten all the information. We're still going through it all, but we've gotten all the health department from Kern County, other counties. Certainly the Groundwater Cooperative Group, we've got all of their information. We've talked to Don to try to get information the Water District has. I know Donna provided a long list of mutuals, old information on mutuals and information that we've cross-referenced with our county information. We've used the DWR database. I heard this morning that Donna may have another list from old domestic wells and things. We're gathering all that information. I'm going to let you know that our intent right now is to get through that information, and most likely we'll revise, update that information, and send it both to the PAC and the TAC and ask for input on any other information they have. I mean, our goal is to be as transparent as possible and collect as much information as we can, and I hope it's not too sensitive for folks to provide it. I mean, if they don't want to provide it, they don't have to, but our goal is to reach out and make sure we've done our job to go out and try to find as much information as we can. So that will be coming. Lastly, at the TAC, there was a recommendation that we prepare and distribute what they call a guidance document, and I don't think that's a very good title. The intent was something that describes what we're doing and why we need your well information. That's what it really was. So I'll probably change the title to a different title that is more directed toward an information document and request for information. We'll prepare that draft. We'll bring it back to the TAC and make sure they're good with it. And the intention would be to distribute it. I'm not sure how yet. But we'll distribute that information out there as an information document to folks in the community as to what everybody's doing here and the kind of information we're looking for. Hopefully we'll get some feedback on that too. So that's all I have, and I guess we could open it to the board or comments.
Okay. Any other board comments? Any other public comment? Please come up and come to the podium, please, and state your name for the record.
Renee Westelusk. I'm a member of the PAC. I just have a question regarding the direction of the PAC. Are we going to be getting more assignments? Because it doesn't look like anything's on this poem except near the end for the GSP, approval process. And I didn't see any assignments or task responsibilities on this.
Yes, the answer is yes.
So we will be included.
And we talked with Donna about it this morning. Yes, there will be more coming and direction from staff and the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we will go to item number, where are we? The TAC report.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson and board members. If I may iterate again what Steve just mentioned, these comments that I'm going to report, they did happen a few weeks ago at our meeting, but there are new things that are happening even currently. Stuff's moving fast. So this does iterate what we had our discussion there. And again, things are already changing and moving forward, which is great. My first discussion, just giving through, is Stetson's. They presented our priority projects and tasks. The first one is the Prop 1 grant. The funding updated was provided to us. The IWV GA has received full funding for both categories 1 and 2. This was mentioned to us. The next item B, modeling schedule update was provided. There was an update on coordination with the Navy DRI contract that was provided. There was a question about how the brackish water study will be integrated into this model. And there will be structural changes to the DRI model, and they are coming. Recycled water opportunities update. The discussion on regulatory constraints and opportunities, including non-potable reuse, including septic tank flows, indirect potable reuse, and direct potable reuse on top of that. Those were all discussed. Alternative import water opportunities update. Let's see, potential imported sources from Owens Valley, the Cadiz Water Project, and the Fremont Valley Recovery Project. These were discussed within this meeting as well. There was also a discussion on reporting of the pumping without meters. The special workshop that came later in that day, more discussion occurred, and TAC will continue to assist. The discussion on identification of potential well owners subject to pumping assessment. This is just the input was provided by WRM on sources to identify the wells, and the committee emphasized the need for complete well inventory information. Discussion on Prop 1 grant that continued a little bit as needed. The committee indicated conservation work should be coordinated with Indian Wells Valley Water District. Our future agenda items, the June and July dates, are being reviewed. Let's see. They may be changed in order to meet quorum requirements due to holidays and other state-related groundwater meetings that TAC members may be attending out of town. So TAC and Stetson will inform the GA of any of our changes on the dates. And our meeting was adjourned at 4:15. That's it.
Thank you. I understand there is no action items that you're asking for us, so we are going to not take that part, and we will go on to the next item, which will be the PAC committee report.
The following actions and discussions took place on the March 29th meeting. This meeting was approved as an alternate meeting for the April 5th, 2018 PAC meeting. I'm just going to emphasize agenda item 7, which was a discussion and responses to questions from the Water Resources Manager, who sent us an email back at the end of January. And he asked 3 different questions. We think we've addressed most of those in the communication and engagement plan that we have developed. But there was one that we had some questions about, dealing with the written documents that PAC will provide during the SIGMA process and the GSP development. And so we were saying that our main written document is the C&E plan, but other written documents PAC will provide are written reviews and recommendations on each topic, on the PAC potential action schedule, and also on the draft of each GSP element or GSP chapter. And of course, review and comment on the draft final of the GSP before board approval and submission to DWR. So the PAC members recommended that on the POEM and the PAC potential action schedule, the description column should state for each topic or GSP element discussion of outreach plan and policy options. We are looking forward to seeing topics or GSP elements forwarded to us from the Water Resources Manager and the TAC for the PAC to review and develop policy alternatives and recommendations. The meeting adjourned at 9:06 p.m. And we are going to have a presentation of the C&E plan today. So I think probably that's the next item on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I gave each of the board members a little handout with the background for the development of the plan. the various documents that we went through and reviewed, examples of other plans that we used to look at and discuss. And I think we also used DWR guidance documents and the DWR website digital toolkit. So we made access to all of these. Lorelei Oviatt, who's an advisory member of the PAC, is here to go through the presentation of the plan. We do have some copies available here at the desk. And I thank Lorelei for all the help she's given to us to get this plan together in a readable document. Okay. Lorelei, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Thomas. Thank you very much for this opportunity. This was an exciting process for the PAC. It was so collaborative. The entire PAC came together collaboratively, along with the public, to come up with the plan that you have in front of you. And so I do believe we were going to put it on the, put it up. Is this how do we do this here? No? Next? There we go. Is it the other way around? This way? All right, well, that's good. All right. So it's in a PDF form and you have it. But the idea of giving this presentation today is to actually tell you the point of these different parts of the C&E plan, since you are able to read it. So first of all, they felt strongly that there should be an executive summary that sets the tone that we believe your board has communicated, that there are 2 steps to how you can engage and make sure that the technical work that you are doing here, for all these technical people who are talking to each other and you're interested, we can make sure that everybody in Inyo, in San Bernardino County, and in Kern County, everyone starts to understand, number one, the magnitude of what you're trying to do here, which is communication, and second, how can they effectively participate? What are the opportunities for them to participate in this? The introduction and the background was taken directly from the Prop 1 information, as well as the purpose and organization. Those were all taken from the Prop 1 grant that Mr. Johnson's and the Stetson team provided. We did make minor edits to make it work for this particular document because it had references to things that were attached to the Prop 1 grant, and we amended some minor errors. So that was not written by the PAC. It was written by your board and by the staff. We do begin with goals and desired outcomes. These goals reflect kind of a collaborative effort to make sure that we include all stakeholders, that we are concerned about water rights, we are concerned about private property rights, but we're also concerned about achieving the goal of this plan in the time frame that needs to happen and the laws. So that was the language that you see in the goals. And the second issue that the PAC was very concerned about was that this plan speak in plain English such that people understand why you have this communication and engagement plan, that it not be a highly technically, staffed document with lots of narrative, that it actually be something accessible. And so part of the communication objectives, which are these little kind of bullet points at the top, are the guiding principles. Now, what is the point of all this? The point of all this is, as much as we appreciate Stetson Engineering, they are new to this valley, they are new to this area. The PAC believed that part of your task to them was to provide a document that, number one, outside consultants could actually get a sense of how does this community work? How do they like to be communicated with? What are the issues and concerns you need to take into account when you are drafting a communication to them? And then second of all, that DWR is clear, and we are clearly asking that this be included as a document in the work plan that you provide back for the grant. With all due respect, we believe you lost points on that issue because it was a very minimal communication kind of section that we stuck in there, whereas the DWR guidelines are very, very specific, and we have followed them. So we believe that when you send this back for your grant, for our grant, that you include this. And, we could help you summarize if you need anything for the work plan. So it's a commitment to open communication, it's inclusivity and respect for all views, it's assurances of a two-way communication, be clear about the process and the details of the problem, and individualized contact and the creation of meaningful opportunities. And so part of the most important part of this is on page 6 is this presentation and communication concerns and challenges. So as an example, you heard Mr. Johnson note that the TAC apparently is putting together an outreach document for water wells. We would ask that you take into account these communication concerns, and I would even recommend that you refer that to the PAC to see what is this technical document. Because as you can see, we have been very, grassroots about some of the issues that you have already seen. First of all, use of unfamiliar technical language and terminology. It's all great to talk about modeling and, talk about all of these things you do in the TAC. How are you going to communicate that to the average well owner on what that actually means? And there are ways to do that, but you have to struggle with it to get it in that form. Lack of attendance. This is something the PAC was clear about. These are people who are here, are people who are relatively engaged in the process. So how do you go beyond a meeting like this and engage those people? And we have come up with some suggestions. We are also they were very, very sensitive about the budget. This was not the Cadillac of outreach. The PAC was very innovative in trying to figure out how we can do this without having to spend all the budget money on it. Access for non-English language users is, of course, something that you're always familiar with. Lack of access to the internet. But then there is this sensitive one, engaging people with privacy concerns, which translated means, get off my property, don't tell me to put a meter on it. How are you going to communicate that? What is the outreach you're going to do? There are ways to use organizations and relationships such that you can get people educated, that this is actually something good for them in the future, that a strong and healthy water table benefits us all. Non-interest in the subject and apathy. Then we also have absentee and out-of-basin landowners. We have temporary employees in the basin who own, and this is based on our military installation. And then they also want you to emphasize the seriousness of the basin concerns without being alarmist. I thought this took some wordsmithing, but I think this is a really good standard that we've all been struggling with. How do we make sure people know this is important and we have to make this deadline without alarming them to the point where they disengage and they don't really hear that there are solutions? So I would ask that the PAC is asking that this list, for example, inform your, whatever you're going to call it, guidance document, handout, mailer on water wells, for example. That's an example of how to use this communication and engagement plan. Then we talked about outreach methods and notifications. These are all normal. But we also came up with the idea of a speaker bureau. So the idea would be is that you as a board, you all have members of the community or people in your organizations, that at some point you come up with a speaker bureau, people that you have designated as people you believe are credible, that will stay on message, that will deliver whatever it is you want to deliver. They're volunteers. They come up as speakers. And then if you turn to the next page, we have come up with every single organization. This was an extensive list, but there are little asterisks next to the organizations that we believe are the kind that are always looking for speakers. The Rotary is always looking for a speaker. If anyone's been on an organization,
yay!
Exactly. If you've been in an organization and you've been designated to find the next speaker, you're excited that someone is volunteering. So the idea would be is when you're ready, You craft a message, you have this speaker bureau, and you actually have them outreach to these community groups and go on the circuit to meet with them. And this will get into places and organizations and communication that maybe they don't read the newspaper. Maybe they're not even on somebody's email list. But they will be able to then tell their friends and neighbors, yeah, I had a great conversation at the lunch meeting. Here's what's really going on, and here's the next opportunity. So we provided you this notification list. Under separate cover, my department is putting together a full mailing list of all of this, along with phone numbers and email contacts. The feeling was that probably wasn't something we really wanted to put in the public C&E list. It is public information. But instead, we will create it as a separate list, which we'll provide to your staff and we'll provide to Mr. Johnson so that when he wants to do a mailing, and Laura, when you need to do something, you will have a way to do that without having to go and duplicate it. And we'll create it also as mailing labels for you and whatever format you want. So that's something that I will provide after your board adopts this. We also went through and talked about state government, federal government, put together the list, and the PAC's intention, I think, is to support you with this communication engagement plan in a more structured outreach. And I think part of the work that you've done up until now has engendered large turnouts, and it's all worked. But at some point, you are going to want to have a handout. Here's what's happening on the groundwater sustainability planning. We're working on the chapters. The next workshop is this. You're going to want to do that, and we hope that this will help your staff organize that in a way that, so they don't have to do all this groundwork and more effectively outreach. We very much also wanted to appreciate the volunteers who brought food. The Nugents, I think, put up the pizzas, and we were committed to finishing this, which is why we finished at 9. So appreciate your time. I want to thank and acknowledge all of the, if the PAC members who are here would stand up. And, I'm available for questions. Donna and I are both here available, and we ask that you adopt this, make any modifications, of course, that you want, and give us more tasks that we can bring everyone together and provide you with tools. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there comments from the board? Please.
Lorelei, if I may, I had a question, actually.
Sure.
You've provided us a list of different ways of outreach and communicating with the different users and parties within the basin. Was the development of this list, was it anecdotal or database in terms, data-based? Has the city or the water district kind of evaluated how they're most effective getting word out? Is it mailing a newsletter, or is it paying for a display ad versus a legal ad in the newspaper? Is it a social media account? Because you're offering. Obviously, there's never one direct way. There's never one way that you're going to communicate with people.
Right.
In today's age, you've got to use multiple methods. But I just didn't know whether there's been any analysis of how the people of this basin prefer to get their information. What's the most effective ways?
There was a lot of discussion about that. Obviously, there is a built-in communication network that you can put things in the water bill. But the concern there, of course, is people who don't get a water bill don't get the communication. We then talked about the fact that the Kern County Planning Department, when we did our big rezone, sent a notice to every single property owner, every single one, 3 times. It's expensive. It was effective, but it is very expensive. And so one of the things that the PAC did want is at least once you should do that. Now, when you do that is up to you. And there are ways to cut the cost of that. We stuffed envelopes. I had my staff stuff envelopes. There's ways to do it rather than just sending it out and having it done by a consultant. But they were clear by the time we finished that you mailing that out to every single property owner over and over and over again will far exceed the budget that you have put in for outreach. However, they do believe strongly that at least once in this process, perhaps when the draft GSP plan, for example, is ready, you should do that. The reason we came up with the organizational speakers bureau is because that's one of the most effective ways. This is a community, as is Trona, as is, Inyo, where it is much more of a, the people at the Rotary go and talk to their people at their church. We even put churches on here. And that unfortunately, we need to get more feet on the ground. We need to get more individualized conversations. Having the website is excellent. And so, of course, since you already have one, there was discussion of maybe doing handouts, maybe doing, here's how to participate. Those types of PR outreach could definitely be put on the internet, sent to the Daily Independent and others for stories, but that's a campaign. And so that is why you have this long list of organizations, that is really the most effective. But there are some that would like you to send 3 or 4 of these letters to everybody in the Valley. But once again, there is a cost.
Bob, did you have more? Lorelei, when you in that PAC committee meeting, I attended that, and you gave some costs of what it costs Kern County to do that. Could you share those with the rest of us?
Yes, to send one notice, a physical snail mail notice to every single parcel, and then expanding it just a little bit for Inyo. That was with us stuffing the envelopes. The postage alone was like $9,000. That doesn't even include, we sent it out and had the paperwork, but, I was kind of writing off the staff. We'll volunteer to stuff envelopes if that's what it comes down to. The county will throw in for that. But the postage alone is $9,000 just to send it once. So,
what do you think staff time would have cost if we had to pay staff to do that?
They were pretty happy. I bought them lunch, but it takes a few hours. We sent them over to Blueprint, who charges us, a few cents for each to run them all. It's a couple $100,000. It's like, I think we came up with 125,000 individual parcels that you have to send them out to. We took duplicates off, so my staff spent probably 4 hours going through the list to take duplicate off. In other words, you got one and it was for multiple parcels. So we had to go through and do that. That took quite a this. So the good news is we have a mailing list, right? We just have to add Inyo County and San Bernardino County, which is easy. We can coordinate with you to do that. One of the suggestions that, we did talk about, it's not specifically this, but I'll say, is that we do believe that your budget, you need to up your budget. You only have $21,000, I think it is, Mr. Johnson. You need to at least have $35,000 or $40,000 in there for outreach. Okay, maybe $35,000, but $21,000 for outreach for this entire plan, we just don't see you being able to really engage. And if we can do it cheaper, we would, and then you would have some extra money. But that was just when we ran the numbers.
You talked about the Speakers Bureau. Who is going to develop the points, and is it going to be a consistent speaking engagement by whomever does it all the time, and how is that going to be accomplished?
Chair Breeden, your board directed the PAC not to engage in this.
I got that.
Not to engage in writing things. Certainly, our thought is that was going to be a staff exercise that they would then bring back to your board in regards of, you would tell them what the message is. Okay? If, however, you would like to use this PAC for that purpose, that, in other words, you write something and they review it, then that could be useful. having us all write something, I think we all agreed that having us all write a message would probably not be very effective. I think we'd all agree on that.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you.
you saying that because you were directed that way. And I was trying to figure out how we got the same consistent message out every time, whether it be the Speakers Bureau or whether it be simply out on paper and posted and online and in service. I wanted to see how we would do that. And I'd like to hear some recommendations from PAC. Because clearly you are the people and you know what it is. I'd like to see what you all have to say.
I say something.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Sorry for being late. I'd like to take immediate action on this. I'd like to assign staff to come up with a matching names of people on this board with the service organizations that are listed, and I'd like to be in that process immediately. Shouldn't be too tough. I volunteer for any and all. And I'm sure other members of the board will also do that. Appreciate this. I think it's a marvelous piece of work. It's exactly what I was looking for. It's complete. However, I still want to better understand how do we reach outside our community. I want to focus on how do we get to DWR. When was the last time any one member of this board was talking to DWR? Or when was the last time DWR was sitting right here giving us updates on exactly what they're doing? I want to talk to Kevin McCarthy's office. I want to talk to Gene Fuller's office. I want to talk to the Navy. And I want to do it on a regular drumbeat that makes sure they understand exactly what our perspective is and where we are in the throes of this, because it's happening and we're closing in on crunch time. And I still, every once in a while, get feelings from these people that I talk to that they don't get it. So, and I'm not talking about people in this community. I'm talking about people outside this community. So I appreciate that. I say we suggest we take immediate action on it. We line up individuals on the Speaker Bureau. I love that idea. Every other option I'm listed on here, I think we're in the throes of doing it, and we're doing a pretty good job. I would also like to keep a log of who's doing what and when and where, so we have a steady drumbeat of making sure these people are engaged and understand. There was one other thing. I'd like staff also to come back with a plan. I agree. I think one mailing is sufficient, at least now, because of our budget concerns. We need to keep our budget under control. But I do like the idea of being complete in our effort to notify everybody. In order to do that, I think the mailings to each individual parcel is a good idea. When we do that, I'll leave that up to the Water Resource Manager and the staff to tell us what you think, but that's with my recommendation. And does that need a vote? Or does that need other comments?
Spending any money.
Let's have some discussion on that.
Well, I've had a little comment or thank you or something. Can I do that?
Pardon me?
Can I add something?
Well, yeah, that's why I'm asking for discussion.
I thought you were looking for a motion. No, it's brilliant. I wouldn't expect anything less from you guys, so it was good. I totally agree with your timing of the mailer. The optimal time is to send out. We're going to present a draft. That's the time anybody can have a comment that actually has an impact. So I thought that was wonderful. As far as Speakers Bureau, any of us board members can speak. I talk to my Rotary Club whenever they need a speaker. I don't get a free lunch either. That really kind of crabby deal. But the deal is, in fact, you got to pay extra if you speak there. The deal is all I do is just give them a narrative of where we're at today. A little bit of history. Here's where we're at today, and here's where we're headed tomorrow. That's all I ever do. I don't give my personal opinions, only if you buy me a beer later on. So I think all of us can do that. I think we're all in the loop. So I'll always do Rotary, and what it like Mick says, whoever else needs it, easy breezy.
Any other board comment? Okay, any other public comment?
I think the fact that Lorelei provided you with a complete mailing list is awesome. And as a private citizen, I thank you. You went out of your way there to hasten getting on with this project.
Okay, Mick, if you want to make a motion and there's no other discussion.
Okay, my motion is to immediately implement the outreach plan by first establishing a speaker bureau and asking staff to align members of this board with speaking assignments that are listed in the service organizations. Secondly, ask staff for recommendation to come back at the next meeting on when we need to do our first mailer to every parcel.
Is that adopting the resolution that adopts the plan? Yes.
Second?
I will second that.
Okay, go ahead, thank you. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we have direction, staff. Okay, thank you very much. Donna and Lorelei, the committee, you guys have spent a lot of hours, and I appreciate the work you've done. It's been amazing. Okay, we are not going to take any action on item 10 because we've already done that. And so the general manager's report.
I have none at this time.
Okay, closing comments. Let's start down at that end and go this way.
I have
Okay. None?
I had a procedural question, actually. We approved on the consent calendar something regarding TAC membership, but there was nothing in the agenda packet. So what did we approve?
You shouldn't have voted on it. You didn't.
Thought maybe something got added after I got my packet in the mail.
Wasn't the item that we were adding one more person because, Keith, I know was it you who brought it up?
I know Adam was concerned about it. He wanted to make sure we voted on it, but I just wasn't sure what we were voting on.
Yeah, I'm looking for Phil because I think that was a Phil item, but I don't.
Okay, all right.
He managed to ditch out of the room conveniently. Yeah, I don't know. That may be on there in error. You're right. There's nothing in the packet, so there's no action.
Okay, all right.
Was the TAC expecting we were doing some kind of action?
Yes.
What? Could you share with us what it was?
This is for the new small ag. Name is yes, thank you. And we presented that he had come in and was going to be. We asked if he could be a member, and then it just needed to be approved at the next meeting. And this was the approval. I saw TAC, but I didn't hear that that's what you were voting on, so that's why I asked that. That was my mistake.
It was on the consent calendar, so it's hard to see.
And unfortunately, it's on the consent calendar, but there isn't anything specific to it. They just approved nothing specific. We're still in the meeting, though, so I suppose we can. Why don't we take that one out of order now?
I think that's a marvelous idea.
So, who is it that you're looking to appoint on the TAC? Don Quist. Don Quist.
Motion on Don Quist being a member of the TAC.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we did our job. Thank you. Okay,
Thank you,
then we've got, everybody's made their comments. We are going to go into closed session.